Boy, do we have a great show for you today. First up, President Trump has announced his 2024 run for the White House. I explain why he is the only candidate who can meet this pivotal moment and return our country to its founding principles. In addition, the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that Biden's student loan plan is unconstitutional in an emergency preliminary injunction order. That's a big win for the rule of law. Plus, several GOP senators stand against traditional marriage. It is shameful. And I take a deep dive into the evils of the Chinese Communist Party. All that and much, much more on today's episode of Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
A battle for the fate of America rages. The radical left seeks to destroy the very foundations of our republic. God, the family, and the Constitution are under attack. Amidst the chaos, Doug Wardlow speaks truth and points the way back to freedom. It is time to go on offense. This is Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.
Welcome to Founding Principles. I am your host, Doug Wardlow. So, the biggest news of the week was, of course, President Trump's announcement that he is running for president in 2024. His announcement speech in Mar-a-Lago on Tuesday night ran over an hour long, and it was truly an inspiring speech. It was also a very disciplined speech. Trump did not attack DeSantis or any other potential opponent, nor did he hurl insults at anyone. Rather, he spoke in serious but also in very inspirational and stirring tones about the reasons he is running, about the mess the Biden administration has gotten us into, about how he will fix that mess, and about the policies he will pursue as president. He also spoke about how he will make our country great again. The speech focused quite heavily on foreign policy, which sets Trump apart from other potential candidates who don't have national foreign policy experience. That's a very smart move, and I would be willing to bet we will see quite a bit more emphasis on foreign policy, and particularly on China, from the Trump campaign going forward. The announcement speech was particularly notable because it shows that Trump and his advisors have thought long and hard about how best to approach the campaign, and they have carefully and thoughtfully developed a message and a platform that will set Trump apart, inspire the American voter to rally to his cause, and demonstrate that Trump is very serious about what he is setting out to do. If Trump continues along the path he laid out for his campaign on Tuesday night, and I believe he will, then he will be unstoppable. And that is a very exciting prospect because the path he laid out and his description of his reasons for running were fantastic, and they weren't at all ego-driven or selfish. Trump, contrary to the media's near constant lies about his character, is at bottom driven by his strong love for our country and his strong desire to restore America, as he said several times in his speech, to restore it to greatness and glory. Let's watch.
The decline of America is being forced upon us by Biden and the radical left lunatics running our government right into the ground. This decline is not a fate we must accept. When given the choice, boldly, clearly, and directly, I believe the American people will overwhelmingly reject the left's platform of national ruin, and they will embrace our platform of national greatness and glory to America. Glory.
You see, Trump gets it. He understands that the radical left hates America and has set out to tear down our country from within. He also understands that the vast majority of the American people do not hate our country, and that the people feel that we are on the cusp of losing what it means to be American. We are standing near the edge of the abyss, and the radical leftists are urging us forward, urging us to step over the edge and into 1,000 years of darkness. Trump sees how urgent it is that we reverse course immediately. And he also understands that a platform of national renewal will resonate strongly with Americans. We the people have not yet lost our taste for freedom, and Trump is out to make sure that we never do. Trump also understands just how loud all of those voices from the left that urge us to leap into the abyss truly are. He understands the strength of the forces arrayed against us. And at a key moment in his speech on Tuesday, he showed true humility, and he told us exactly how we overcome those forces of the left. Let's watch.
Our country is in a horrible state. We're in grave trouble. This is not a task for a politician or a conventional candidate. This is a task for a great movement that embodies the courage, confidence, and the spirit of the American people.
You see, Trump isn't campaigning for himself, and he isn't so arrogant to think that he can be America's savior. Rather, he recognizes that he is leading and inspiring a movement of Americans who love our country and who want to save it. He is charting the course back to America's founding principles. He is leading the way, and he is inspiring other leaders to stand up and to do the same. So the Trump campaign isn't just a campaign for the presidency. It is so much more than that. Trump has framed the campaign as a movement for American renewal. That's the kind of message that can win over hearts and minds and win an election. And it's the kind of message that we desperately need right now as a country. Now, if the constitutional government, the rule of law, and freedom are to stand any chance against the socialist forces of the radical left, then we need Trump and we need his message. So his timing is perfect and his message is spot on. And I think that's why Trump focuses so much on China. Trump understands that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is one of the greatest forces for evil in the world. The values of the Chinese Communist Party are diametrically opposed to those of America. Trump's speech emphasized several important policy points, but this was one of the most important. Let's play the clip.
Economic security is national security, and that's what it is. We need economic security. That is why we will launch an all-out campaign to eliminate America's dependence on China. We will bring our supply chains, which are a disaster right now. You can't get anything, and good luck getting a turkey for Thanksgiving. Number one, you won't get it, and if you do, you're going to pay 3 to 4 times more than you paid last year. But we will bring our supply chains and manufacturing base back home, as we were strongly doing during the Trump administration, and we will systematically bring back wealth, health, and success to the American middle class and to America itself.
You see, Trump understands that the CCP is so evil that in the future, it will be impossible to trade with China unless the CCP falls from power. Until then, we have to do everything possible to ensure that we are in no way reliant on China. That means delinking trade, separating supply chains, and isolating China's economy. You see, Trump understands that the CCP is not really that strong. The people of China may be quite near the point where they finally cast off the shackles of the Chinese Communist Party and embrace freedom for the first time in a very, very long time. In fact, this is exciting. China is rapidly Christianizing. It is estimated that there are well over 100 million Christians in China, and they have the strong devotion that converts always have. What's more, Chinese Christians are terribly oppressed, and history demonstrates that Christians cannot be oppressed out of existence. Now, just look at history. Oppression of Christians in Rome led to increased devotion and the spread of Christianity, and eventually, after a long period of time, it led to the conversion of the entire Roman Empire to Christ. A very similar thing appears to be happening in China. So God is working miracles in that country. We should all pray for Chinese Christians and pray for the persecuted Chinese Christian church. It very well could lead, it could be the force that leads to the toppling of the Communist Party itself. Now, I've even heard that some lower echelon members of the Chinese Communist Party are becoming Christians. And if that continues to happen, the Chinese Communist Party will be torn down from within. And that'll be a great thing for China and a great thing for the world. Now, Trump, he understands the importance of eliminating all dependence on China. He understands how fragile that regime is. He understands that we can topple it if we put our mind to it. It is necessary to ensure that the CCP has no leverage over us and cannot harm our economy. It's also important because it will further help delegitimize and undermine the CCP's grip over that country. So it's a wonderful thing, just a great thing, that Trump is putting the effort to isolate the CCP at the center of his presidential campaign. And this was just one of the so many great things in Trump's announcement speech, one of the many things to be genuinely excited about. Very importantly, Trump leaned into the culture war, just as he did throughout his first term in the White House. He is expressly rejecting the advice and the opinions coming from the Rhino establishment moderate wing of the Republican Party, from people like Mitch McConnell, who never want Republican candidates to talk about anything other than tax cuts and maybe regulatory reform. Trump, in his characteristic style, and with complete authenticity, and that's important. One of the traits that makes him such a great candidate is his authenticity. He laid out exactly what he will do to fight back against the left's war against American culture, and he did that in no uncertain terms. Let's play the next clip.
When I'm in the White House, our schools will cease pushing critical race theory as they were. Radical civics and gender insanity, or if they do that, they will lose all federal funding, but we'll get them to stop. And I will be the president who finally fixes education in America. We were doing great. We were starting to really get it right. We will not let men, as an example, participate in women's sports. Is that okay? No men. No men. My people tell me, sir, that's politically incorrect to say. I said, that's okay, I'll say it anyway, if you don't mind. We've had tremendous problems, and you know, it's very unfair to women, just very, very unfair. We will defend the rights of parents, and we will defend the family as the center of American life.
Trump's words are music to the ears of all God-fearing American patriots. He is taking a strong stand for the family, and he is taking the traditional conservative point of view that the family, not the individual, not the self, but the family is the fundamental building block of society. He calls out political correctness as worthless. He understands that political correctness is a tool that the left has used in America and, frankly, all over the world to control people's minds and to discourage thought that is not in line with leftist orthodoxy. So Trump calls it out and rejects it. And you know, and that was Trump himself. Off teleprompter, that's just how he thinks. It's natural to him. He is naturally opposed to the socialist ideas of the radical left, and he is naturally predisposed to freedom. And you can tell then that Trump really and truly loves America. And why? Trump loves America for the same reasons we all do, because America is the home of the free, the beacon of freedom for the world, and the keeper of the sacred fire of liberty. In addition, Trump correctly calls the transgender agenda exactly what it is: gender insanity. He doesn't mince words. He is standing up boldly for truth. He will not let the left get away with convincing people to believe in falsehoods like that boys can decide to be girls or vice versa. He will not let the left get away with convincing people that 2 + 2 = 5. He is standing up for our children, standing against the child abusers and the groomers, and standing up for the reality that God created man and God created woman, and he designed man and woman to come together and create families, the foundation of society. Now, it's also a very, very good thing that Trump makes a point of standing in opposition to critical race theory. Trump will work to wipe out CRT because he knows, like we all do, that CRT is all about denigrating America and dividing Americans on racial lines, creating strife to break down America so that the radical leftists can build a socialist society in its place. Trump rejects socialism. He believes in freedom. He believes in America. He believes in the pronouncement of the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. And he believes in the words of Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who said that people must always be judged by the content of their character and never by the color of their skin. We can be confident that Trump will fight hard for that universal truth. But wait, that's not all. Trump's speech just keeps getting better and better. You know, I kind of feel like a kid in the candy store when I'm listening to it, because there's so much to be excited about, and there is even more. So let's play another clip.
With that, and of course, we will do whatever it takes to bring back honesty, confidence, and trust in our elections. To eliminate cheating, I will immediately demand voter ID, same-day voting, and only paper ballots.
Now, you know, it's notable that Trump showed discipline, and he didn't spend any time really going back over the grave injustice that was the 2020 elections. He is looking forward, and he will make sure that nothing like 2020 ever happens again. He takes it personally because he was grievously wronged. So we can trust that President Trump will absolutely get to the bottom of the problem of election security. He will secure the vote and make sure that no American is ever disenfranchised by having their vote canceled out by an illegitimate illegal ballot. And his solution is elegant and simple. It is exactly the cure that we need: voter ID, same-day voting, and only paper ballots. Simple, straight to the point, and supported by the vast majority of Americans. because Trump knows that we must have secure elections in order to have a functioning constitutional republic. And we cannot have situations where vote counting goes on for days and for weeks, like what has been happening in Arizona this cycle. That undermines the people's confidence in the electoral franchise. And when people stop trusting that elections are functioning properly, they naturally question whether the people elected to make laws and enforce laws are legitimately in power. And that leads to a very dangerous question. People ultimately may start to ask whether those laws should be followed at all, because if they're not legitimate, why should they be, right? If we were to get that far, if people start asking that question, that's terrible. We face societal collapse. So that's why it's absolutely imperative that we shore up confidence in elections, and we need to do that immediately. And we know with 100% certainty that we can trust President Trump to do exactly that. Now, Trump, a little bit later in his speech, he cites the example of France. In France, just as in Israel and in Taiwan, they only use paper ballots. And in the latest French election, 36 million people voted. They used paper ballots, there were no problems, and the results were in by 10 p.m. in the evening. If they can do that in France, we can do it here, just as we did in the past. And we need to vote on a single day. Now, until the law is changed, Republican campaigns will have to figure out how to play the game and maximize our returns by utilizing early voting. But now that's only temporary, because early voting, that's a system we need to get away from. When you have early voting, now in Minnesota, our home state here, early voting begins more than 40 days before Election Day, which is just ridiculous. But when you have early voting, then the earliest voters have different information compared to voters who vote later or on Election Day. So it's like you have multiple elections going on at once. And that means that you don't get a fair reading of the will of the people. The ultimate result is disconnected from what the people actually desire as of the day set for the election by law. That's simply unacceptable. And of course, early voting also gives great occasion for election fraud. It allows for ballot harvesting and drop boxes and all sorts of other shenanigans. If we go back to voting on Election Day with excuse-only absentee voting, many forms of ballot fraud become impossible or at least much more difficult. And paper ballots, that makes the system even more secure. On top of that, add in voter ID, which is just common sense, and then Americans can be much, much, much more confident that election results will reflect the will of the people expressed at the ballot box. Now, of course, President Trump understands that state law governs how we conduct elections. But the federal government can exert influence in a number of ways, just as it did with the Help America Vote Act. Elections and election security is a matter of highest national importance. So it makes sense to pass a law that strongly encourages the states to use paper ballots, to vote on a single day, and to require some form of identification to establish residency and citizenship in order to vote. In fact, the issue is of such high national importance that I would go even further. I believe we should amend the United States Constitution. Let the states maintain control of elections, of course, but we should amend the Constitution to require states to use paper ballots only, to require some kind of identification that establishes citizenship and residency at least, and to require that all voting take place on Election Day, except that states may establish absentee voting for overseas military voters and those who have valid excuses such as infirmity or sickness. President Trump, if you're listening, you might consider adding a constitutional amendment like that to your platform. Now, I want to highlight just one more extremely exciting thing from President Trump's announcement speech. And there were several other things that we're not going to talk about, that are wonderful, like dealing with human trafficking, sealing up the border, and stopping the influx of migrants. There's a lot to this speech, but I want to just play one more clip of something that isn't being talked about very much. Let's go ahead.
We will defend life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We will expand the frontiers of human knowledge and extend the horizons of human achievement. And we will plant our beautiful American flag very soon on the surface of Mars, which I got started.
This is so important for a host of reasons. First, President Trump understands the importance of inspiring the American people. And with tens of thousands of Americans showing up to see Trump speak wherever he holds a rally, Trump has demonstrated time and again his ability to do exactly that. Now, America's history is filled with stories of American triumph and greatness. But to maintain America's greatness and glory and make sure our country remains the beacon of freedom for the entire world, we need to keep writing stories of American greatness into the future. We need to be excited as a people about expanding our knowledge and building new things, creating new technology and exploring God's creation, including the planets and the stars. After all, that's what God has called us to do. He told us to subdue the earth. President Trump gets this. He understands this like no American president has in a very long time. And this is one reason why President Trump initiated, as he mentioned in his speech, the Artemis space program, NASA's program to return humans to the moon and then to Mars. Now, the Artemis program that Trump got going is a great and wonderful thing. Indeed, we should all be very excited about the first Artemis launch that occurred just a few nights ago. That first launch tested the new space launch system and the new Orion spacecraft without humans on board. The next launch will carry humans in that spacecraft into orbit and beyond, all leading up to a launch in the not-so-distant future, sometime in 2024, I believe, that will send mankind back to the moon. Now, several years after we get back to the moon, we're going to put humans on Mars. So if you didn't watch the Artemis launch a few nights ago, I encourage you to go find the video and watch it. It's an important and historic event. But here's the thing. In addition to inspiring Americans to greatness, in addition to stirring the hearts of Americans in a way that will propel us to improve the world and increase opportunities for human flourishing, President Trump got the Artemis space program started for another and extremely important reason. And this reason goes back to China. You see, the Earth is literally running out of rare earth metals, or at least we don't know exactly where to find them. Rare earth metals are critical to the manufacture of important things, and other rare earth elements are critical to the manufacture of important things like computer processors, cell phones, hard drives, spindles, all sorts of electronics. But they are also critical to a variety of defense applications, like missile guidance systems, radar, sonar, and much, much more. So here's the problem. The vast, vast majority of rare earth elements are located and developed and produced in one place, China. In 2011, China accounted for 97% of rare earth metal production. And now the CCP has started to limit the amount of rare earth metals that can be exported out of China. That is a huge national security problem. We cannot be dependent on China for something so incredibly important. Fortunately, an abundance of these critical rare earth elements exists in another place. That's right. You guessed it, on the moon. And that is one of the big reasons Trump has worked so hard, and did work so hard, to get the Artemis program moving. We need to go back to the moon so that we can mine it. We cannot be dependent on China for rare earth metals. Thanks to President Trump, we are on track to get back to the moon by 2024. So it is vitally important that President Trump win in 2024. And by the way, the timing is good because he'll be able to point that to that accomplishment, hopefully during the election cycle. We need him because he understands the true threat of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, better than anybody else. And he has demonstrated that he has the fortitude to stand up to and counter that threat. We need him in office to make America respected and strong on the world stage once again. Now, here's the thing. I am a big fan of Ron DeSantis. DeSantis modeled himself after Trump. He, like Trump, is a strong, true, and bold conservative. His bold conservative governance and his strong conservative campaign led Florida Republicans to momentous victories in the midterm elections. He is not a member of the Rhino Swamp establishment by any means. In fact, I hope that DeSantis will, like President Trump, spend 8 years in the White House. But at the present time, considering the dire situation in which we find our country, President Trump is better suited than anyone else to meet the present moment. He is better suited than anyone else to fight, and fight effectively, for the Constitution, for election security, for the family, and for freedom. And no one else can better inspire the American people to rise up once again, to attain new heights of greatness and glory, and to return our country to its founding principles. And now, it's time for Behind the Headlines. First, on Monday, the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit granted an emergency motion for a nationwide injunction, pending appeal, filed by several red states that blocks the federal government from moving forward with President Biden's student debt cancellation program. This is extremely good news. Nebraska, Missouri, Iowa, and 3 other red states brought the challenge, and this is perhaps the most serious challenge yet to Biden's student debt scheme. The 2 principal arguments advanced by the states were these. First, that the student loan cancellation plan violates the separation of powers because the administration doesn't have statutory authority under the statute that they're citing, the HEROES Act, to do this. And there's no statutory authority whatsoever. Second, The plan is arbitrary and capricious, and it violates the Administrative Procedures Act. So these are two very strong arguments, and I think it is clearly unconstitutional, and hopefully the Eighth Circuit eventually rules that it is, in fact, unconstitutional. Now, at the trial level, the judge, district court level, the district court judge ruled that the states lack standing to bring the appeal in the first instance. In other words, the court held that there is no concrete injury to the states that would be redressable by the court. So if you don't have a concrete injury in fact, and the court can't address that injury, or the injury is not traceable to the conduct you're complaining of, then the court says you have no standing and you can't move forward. You've got to have standing to sue, and that's what the trial court judge concluded. He said that there was no standing for these states. But the Eighth Circuit, this was appealed up to the Eighth Circuit, and the attorneys for the states filed a motion for a stay, or a stay for an emergency injunction rather, pending appeal, meaning they want to block the program nationwide while the Eighth Circuit considers the merits of their case. And the Eighth Circuit held that this stay should be granted, and did grant this injunction, a nationwide injunction. And also the Eighth Circuit concluded in its opinion that the trial court level was incorrect about standing. You see, they talked a lot about Missouri in particular. Missouri has an agency that they set up called the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority. And the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority services student loans, right? So its revenues would be impacted and hurt if a lot of the accounts that it services just go away because Biden decided to unilaterally cancel those students' debts. So that means less money going into the Higher Education Loan Authority in Missouri. And the Higher Education Loan Authority is statutorily commanded under Missouri law to pay into a fund that then pays for capital projects at state colleges and universities. So that means that if the finances of the Higher Education Loan Authority are impacted negatively because of the student debt cancellation scheme, then it will have less ability to fund capital projects as it's required under law to do. So that is an injury then to the Higher Education Loan Authority and to the entire state because it won't be able to fund those capital projects that the law of Missouri requires the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority to do. So that's why there is a concrete injury, and it would be redressable by the court because the court can put an injunction in place and declare the thing unconstitutional, and then that fixes the problem for the Missouri Higher Education Loan Authority, and it fixes the problem with funding capital projects at state universities and colleges. So that's why the court found that there was standing, and then they went on to hold that there's a likelihood of success on the merits, and that the equities tip in favor of granting an injunction. In the states, they tried to, the Biden administration tried to argue that if they did grant an injunction, it should be limited to just the 6 states that are plaintiffs, but the court held that there's no feasible way to do that. You can't limit the program in those states but not in other programs. You can't block the program in only those 6 states that are plaintiffs, and because there's no workable way to do that, the court granted a nationwide injunction stopping and blocking the student loan cancellation scheme until the Eighth Circuit finally concludes on the merits of, or comes out with a decision on the merits of the case. And that'll take some time to do. So for now, the terrible Biden student loan cancellation scheme is blocked and will not be going forward. And this is a huge victory for the rule of law, and I think the Eighth Circuit will ultimately come down and decide that the entire thing is unconstitutional, because it so clearly is. This is a power grab by Biden. He has zero statutory authority. He is just usurping and stealing congressional authority away from Congress and away from the people's representatives, the elected representatives in Congress. The way our system is supposed to work is congressmen make the laws. We elect the people to Congress who then make the laws. And then Congress, the legislative branch, tells the executive branch to carry out the laws and sometimes can give them some wiggle room, if you will, about how exactly to implement certain of the commands that Congress gives. But what Congress can't do is just transfer legislative authority wholesale over to the president. And what the president cannot do is just grab legislative authority from Congress and start making laws on his own. Because he was not elected to make laws, he is part of the executive branch. He was elected to execute the laws and to make sure that they are carried through and carried forward. Well, that's not what he's done. He has grabbed his pen and his phone, and he has declared himself a super legislator, and he has created a plan that cancels out some $400 or $500 billion of student loan debt, all just with the stroke of his pen. Well, that is unconstitutional. That is wrong. That is ultra-virus. There's no statutory authority for that. So I am pretty confident that the Eighth Circuit, and hopeful that the Eighth Circuit will come down on the right side of this one. And they're already heading in that direction with this preliminary injunction ruling. So that's very good news. And we've got to continue to stand up for the Constitution and for the rule of law and be vigilant. And remember, the judges of the Eighth Circuit, they are good judges because a lot of them were appointed by President Trump, who appointed originalists who believe in, or judges that believe in the idea that we need to look at the original meaning of the words of the Constitution and at the original meaning of the text of statutes. That is the opposite of the living Constitution view adopted by so many leftist jurists. And that living Constitution view just allows leftist jurists and judges to interpret their own values right into the Constitution. They just find privacy, they find the right to abortion, kind of between the lines, wherever they want to, whatever they kind of feel like that day, depending on what they had for breakfast, apparently. That determines what they're going to find in our Constitution. So it can change, it's unstable, and it violates the policy preferences expressed by the people through Congress. It violates the Constitution itself. It turns the rule of law upside down. So that's why we have President Trump to thank, and he did a very good job appointing good originalist judges. And so that's also why I'm confident that the Eighth Circuit, which has a lot of those good originalist judges, will come down on the right side of this one and stand up for the Constitution and stand up for the rule of law. So that's some very good news. Moving on, we have an NBC News article, and this one's very interesting. An actress, Candace Cameron Bure, faces backlash, according to the article, after announcing that she will be embarking on a new TV project that will prioritize portraying traditional marriage. Oh my goodness, how scandalous. Traditional marriage. I mean, just imagine a television show that portrays a married man and woman and in a marriage. And they'll probably have kids too. Oh my goodness. And they're probably going to be cisgender children. Oh no. Call the leftist censors. We certainly can't have that. Well, how did we get here? Where are we? We're at a point where an actress is attacked and will be dragged through the mud simply because she wants to portray the kind of family that is the norm in America and must be the norm. The kind of family that the vast majority of men and women in our country strive to form and to maintain. The kind of family that has been the basis of our society, the foundational building block of our society since the beginning of human existence for all societies. Now, I am old enough to remember when Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and pretty much all the Democrats were public supporters of traditional marriage, of man-woman marriage, which is to say marriage, because traditional marriage, that's kind of just repeating itself. There's only one definition of marriage. So to say traditional marriage is just repeating yourself. Marriage is marriage. If it's not one man and one woman, then it's really not a marriage. The left, the Democrats, Supreme Court, whoever, they can say whatever they want about the institution of marriage. They can redefine it, whatever. But the actual, in fact, true definition remains one man and one woman, because that is the natural law, and that is the order of God's creation, and you can't change eternal and natural law. So whatever they call it, it's just marriage. Traditional marriage, that's what we call it, just to make sure that we're being clear that we're not talking about the false forms of marriage that the left always likes to talk about. So, in the span of a little more than a decade, because, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, just as recently as 2008, they supported traditional marriage. Now they don't. The left has foisted its insane, radical view of sexuality and marriage on the country in a short span of time. But why are they doing this? Well, here's the thing. Back when I was working on constitutional, religious freedom, and free speech cases, I got a chance to see behind enemy lines, if you will. I got to see inside the workings of the radical left, and I saw why they're doing this, and they told me why they're doing this. So shortly after the Obergefell decision that foisted same-sex marriage on the entire country for no good reason, shortly after that came down, there was a conference at a university in Arizona on the Obergefell decision. And this was a leftist conference. And they flew in all sorts of professors from all over the country to talk about and analyze the Obergefell decision and the left's movement with respect to marriage and the LGBT agenda. And I went, if you will, undercover to this conference to find out what they had to say. And it was extremely disturbing. Now, the conference was a complete clown show. It was a farce. It was ridiculous. There was nothing academic going on at this academic conference. There was no deep thought. Marxists always like to dress up their poor thinking with big words that actually don't make any sense when you think about them. So there was a lot of that going on, but there wasn't any actual thinking. There wasn't anything truly academic going on. They were just a bunch of activists talking about same-sex marriage and the Obergefell decision. But here's the disturbing thing. What I found and what was going on was this. There were basically two factions in this large conference. About half the room thought that the Obergefell decision was a good thing because the Obergefell decision pushed same-sex marriage on the country. And the reason they thought that it was a good thing is because they thought same-sex marriage would destroy the family. And they were very upfront about that. So one half of the room said Obergefell is good because same-sex marriage will undermine marriage and the family and will destroy the family. Okay. The other half of the room disagreed. But they didn't disagree because they didn't want to destroy the family. No, they also wanted to destroy the family. And they were very express and explicit about that. But they thought that the Obergefell decision was bad because it held up marriage as an ideal and a standard, and therefore it helps to support the family and marriage, even though it expands the definition of marriage and distorts it. They thought that ultimately it would strengthen families, make it harder to destroy and undermine the family, and therefore it would be harder for them to build their socialist utopia. I am not kidding. The left was divided because half of them thought the Obergefell decision and same-sex marriage would help destroy the family, and the other half thought that it was bad because it would not help or it would hinder their efforts to destroy the family. And all of them agreed that the family must be destroyed. Shocking. That is what we are up against. Very, very telling. That's what we are up against. Just consider how insane that is. They agree that the goal should be destroying the family, and they talked about it like it was nothing controversial. Just shocking. That's because the people behind the Human Rights Campaign and the LGBT agenda, they are socialists. They are Marxists. They want to destroy our society. They want to take out those fundamental building blocks. They want to have everyone worshiping the self, talking about their own sexuality. And that way, the government can come in and rebuild a new socialist utopia from the ruins of American society. That is their ultimate goal. They want some kind of hellish socialist dystopia. So fast forward several years to the present time, and just very recently this week, we have a bunch of U.S. Senate Republicans jumping on the leftist bandwagon. Real profiles and courage. Members of the Senate Republican caucus have adopted the radical view of the leftists with respect to marriage. They just voted to advance a bill to codify Obergefell into federal law. No matter that state law is that marriage is a state law issue, no matter that codifying Obergefell will have very serious threats, create very serious threats to religious liberty and freedom, these senators apparently want to virtue signal. And they are on the so-called right side of history. That's what they want to be, or something like that. Of course, guess what, guys? You're on the wrong side of history. Because man-woman marriage has been a thing throughout all of human history, up to about 25 seconds ago. So definitely, you guys are on the wrong side. Your pathetic pandering for popular support is assisting the radical left in destroying marriage and the family. So now, an actress faces backlash for basically saying that not every Christian or every Christmas movie has to have a gay couple in it. For saying that some television programs should sometimes at least show traditional American families, traditional families and man-woman marriage. It's absolutely ridiculous. But what will the headline be 10 years from now? It might read something like this. Actress debanked and fired for failing to affirm drag queen story hour for preschoolers. That is the direction in which we are headed. In the face of the leftist threat to family, to marriage, to our country itself, we must have moral courage. We must have the moral courage that those Republican senators very recently completely lack. It was and it should still be popular to stand up for the institution of marriage. But after one incoherent and rambling Supreme Court opinion by former Justice Anthony Kennedy, we all just give up fighting for marriage and the family? The whole party just gives up on the whole concept? We stop fighting for the foundational building block of society? Unbelievable, terrible, awful. I'm not saying that this fight will be easy. It will not be. But it is a necessary fight. It's about time that we all stand up and defend the things that are truly important. Finally, one more item here. CNN recently interviewed a tyrannical dictator, specifically Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, and floated whether she is considering running for president in 2024. Now, Whitmer does the politician thing, of course, where she laughs and says she's flattered, but that she's not focusing on that right now. But she's thinking about it, right? But just think about this question from CNN for a moment. It should make us and our side feel quite good. The left is so starved for political talent and viable candidates that they're asking Gretchen Whitmer whether she might want to run for president. Now remember, this is the governor whose repeated power grabs and excessive COVID restrictions have been nearly universally condemned. She is one of the governors, after all, who ordered nursing homes to accept COVID-19 patients, and then she turned around and refused to require Michigan nursing homes to report coronavirus deaths publicly. Probably because the truth, if those deaths were reported, would have been politically devastating for her. But despite this, CNN, which is basically a wing of the Democratic Party, apparently thinks Whitmer would be a good pick for president. So the Democrats, they are really scraping at the bottom of the barrel here. On our side, by contrast, we have a deep bench. Trump is, of course, at the top of the list. But after his 4 years in the White House, and I'm confident that he will win the White House, and that'll be a great thing for America, after that, we have all sorts of great possibilities and talented conservatives like Ron DeSantis, Kerry Lake, J.D. Vance, Josh Hawley, and many more. So our side is loaded with talent. And unlike past squishy Republicans, this new scene is filled with bold conservative fighters. Our opponents have insane, boring radicals that are nothing more than poor dinner company. And a lot of times they're a lot worse than that. Perhaps the biggest name on their side is Gavin Newsom, whose state can be best described as one of the rings of hell from Dante's Inferno. Not a great look. Yes, we have to fight the establishment. The establishment in our party, we have to fight the rhino establishment and push forward those true conservative candidates for offices at all levels. But let's look on the bright side. We have loads of talent, and the other side, well, they just don't. Our future can and will be bright if we simply stick to our principles and we never, never give up. Never, never give in. And now it's time for Doug's Deep Dive. 65 million people. No, that's not the number of people on New York State's voter rolls. It's the number of Chinese people who died under the rule of Mao Zedong. 65 million. And Mao became the tyrannical dictator of China in 1949, so that number doesn't even include deaths that occurred due to World War II. As chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, Mao led a brutal, repressive regime until his own death in 1976. 65 million people in about 27 years. And that's actually one of the lower estimates. Now, around 200,000 of those were war casualties from the Korean War. But other than that, pretty much all of those deaths were civilians. Of course, we will never know the true extent of the barbarism. Records from communist nations are incomplete, usually doctored to show the communists in a better light. It's like the Eastern Front in World War II, where casualty numbers for the Russian side are educated guesses. But the exact number isn't what really matters. It's the scope, the terrible, horrible scope. The Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, killed tens upon tens of millions of its own Chinese citizens. In addition to the Great Famine, which most historians attribute to the horrible socialist policies and economic mismanagement of the Great Leap Forward, there was nearly continual atrocities for the duration of Mao's terrible reign. In 1958, Mao gave these remarks. He said, quote, "The first emperor only buried 460 scholars alive, while we've buried 46,000. When we suppressed counter-revolutionaries, didn't we also kill some counter-revolutionary intellectuals? I once debated with the people in the Democratic parties. You accuse us of acting like the first emperor, but you're wrong. We've outdone him 100 times over." Close quote. The CCP was then, and is now, proud of their tradition of brutality and death. To this day, Mao Zedong's embalmed body sits in a glass case within the Memorial Hall in Tiananmen Square, watched over by a military honor guard, viewable to the public every day except Monday. I wonder if that CCP tradition of brutality and murder crossed President Joe Biden's mind as he looked into the eyes of Mao's modern incarnation, Chinese President and CCP Chairman Xi Jinping, who most experts agree is now the CCP's leader for life. On November 14th of this year, sitting next to Xi in Bali, Indonesia, I wonder if Biden remembered that man staring down a column of tanks in early June of 1989. Many of you probably remember that iconic moment. Let's play the clip.
Of the Avenue of Eternal Peace, which as it happened was already occupied. He walked to the middle and stood there. The man was alone, the tank was not. It wasn't just a single tank he stopped. There were 18 tanks and armored...
What we don't know is what really happened there. The CCP crackdown on the night of June 3rd and 4th was brutal, and it is veiled in secrecy to this day. Centered in Tiananmen Square, but occurring in many cities other than Beijing, the Chinese People's Liberation Army violently put down the protests that grew through the spring of that year. They opened fire and brought in tanks, shooting or crushing those in the way. Now, the CCP eventually admitted to 241 killed, including police and soldiers, and around 7,000 wounded. Thousands were arrested, some never to be seen again. But according to the BBC, the numbers were much, much worse, and everyone knows that they were much, much worse. In 2017, the BBC released an article about a secret diplomatic cable sent to London from China about an original source who passed on information from a close friend who is currently a member of the State Council, is what the source said, which is essentially the same as the CCP's cabinet. This cable, relaying information about the Tiananmen Square massacre from a member of the State Council, was sent on June 5th, 1989, so right after the event occurred, and it is in the UK National Archives. Let me just read for you some of that cable. The cable indicates first that the source on the State Council had been reliable in the past and was, quote, careful to separate fact from speculation and rumor. It continues, quote, students understood they were given 1 hour to leave the square, but after 5 minutes, APCs attacked. Students linked arms, but were mown down, including soldiers. APCs then ran over bodies time and again to make pies and remains collected by bulldozer. Remains incinerated and then hosed down drains. 4 wounded girls, students, begged for their lives, but were bayoneted. Close quote. Imagine sending that message back to London. And those were only the highlights. The cable, or the lowlights really, the cable also reports that the death toll was said to be 10,000, far beyond even the higher Western estimates of 1,000. These were mostly students who were peacefully protesting for greater freedoms and basic rights. The CCP called the operation a, quote, suppression of counter-revolutionaries. No, that's not what it was. They killed 10,000 students and others who were simply engaging in peaceful protests. Now let's fast forward to April 25th of 1999. Falun Gong. It's an ancient Chinese practice of meditation which blends Buddhism, movement, and breathing while emphasizing morality and cultivation of virtue. The practice gained a wide following in China, with the CCP estimating there were 3 to 6 million followers at one point. Western estimates put the number much higher, possibly at 70 million. Tensions with the CCP came to a head with a 10,000-strong rally right outside Zhongnan Hai, a former imperial garden in the headquarters of the CCP that sits right next to the Forbidden City in the heart of Beijing. Even though the rally on April 25th was peaceful, it took the CCP by surprise and confirmed their growing fears of the Falun Gong practitioners. On July 20th, the arrests began, and 2 days later, a media blitz let the country know that practicing Falun Gong was illegal, as was protesting the ban. What followed was a crackdown that Mao would have been very proud of. Observers the world over have estimated that between hundreds of thousands and millions of Chinese Falun Gong followers have been abducted or arrested and held in re-education camps and prisons all over the country. In 2013, a photographer for the New York Times named Du Bin made a documentary titled Women Above Ghost's Head. It chronicles torture at CCP's Ma Sanjia labor camp, which is built on top of a graveyard, and it did this by interviewing survivors. Methods used at the labor camp included torture stretching, hanging, something called the tiger bench, and force feeding. Inmates were also tied to deathbeds, stripped, hit with electric batons, and much, much more and worse. Just utter terrible brutality at its worst. Now, Fox 11 in Los Angeles had a story a few years ago that included some footage from within a similar CCP labor camp. Let's play that clip.
He also filmed this video of a Falun Gong practitioner who he says was severely injured by guards at the camp. You can see he's shackled to his bed and underweight with lesions on his skin.
Terrible. Torture, starvation, beatings, all the hallmarks of the CCP. But this gets worse. Ethan Gutmann, in his book State Organs, estimates that 65,000 Falun Gong members have been killed to harvest their organs between 2000 and 2008 alone. We'll be talking about that and more in a future show. So just as with Mao, the true death toll of this brutality will likely never be known. But now fast forward to Hong Kong in 2014. Now, Hong Kong enjoys a special status within the CCP empire since the British gave the area back to China on July 1st, 1997. On that date ended 156 years of British rule there. Hong Kong is officially a special administrative region, an SAR, with a government and economic system separate from, but now very heavily influenced by, the CCP. It has become one of the most important global financial hubs, and it became that long before the CCP took it back over. In 2014, the CCP announced, quote, reforms to the Hong Kong political system, which essentially amounted to the CCP pre-screening the candidates for the chief executive of Hong Kong. As one would expect from a principality that has been mostly self-governing for some time, the people in Hong Kong were not happy. They saw what was coming. The Hong Kong Federation of Students and Scholars began protesting, mostly sit-ins, in September of that year, 2014, and before long, the protests, which went on until December, were reaching 100,000 people. As the protests lost steam, the CCP broke up what remained with beating and arrests and brutality. Then, in 2019, tensions grew again when the Legislative Council of Hong Kong proposed a fugitive offenders bill that many saw as a vehicle for the CCP to suppress dissent within Hong Kong and elsewhere. By March, there were protests, and on June 9th, a demonstration of hundreds of thousands. On the 12th and the 16th, there were even larger protests outside the legislative complex as people tried to stall the bill. Now, enter the CCP police state. Massive police action resulted in violent, large-scale clashes and demonstrations. Thousands were arrested as the protests continued throughout the summer. On Sunday, August 18, 2019, an estimated 1.7 million people marched peacefully in and around Victoria Park, less than a mile from the government center. The demonstrations continued at varying levels of intensities all the way up until the COVID lockdowns and the new national security law, which included Hong Kong, was passed by the CCP on June 30th of 2020. Even today, there is still unrest. According to the South China Morning Post, which was founded in 1903 and has been the major paper in Hong Kong since early British colonial rule, there were 10,200 arrests in the 20 months since June 2019. While not all were convicted, the treatment of those arrested was harsh. The use of torture was common, and many people simply disappeared. Now, LAD Bible TV interviewed one person who experienced this in Hong Kong. Let's play the clip.
I've been blindfolded, I've been hooded, I've been shackled, I've been handcuffed, and drove me on the unknown car, drove me into the unknown place. And I felt that it's very, very dead silent. And I heard the sounds of moving furniture. And I understand that is some tool for torture. Because
As you can see, the CCP has no qualms with abusing and killing Chinese citizens. That has been not only true, but just plain common, especially when it comes to the death penalty. In 1979, the CCP had 74 offenses punishable by death. In the last decade or so, pressure from various groups have encouraged the CCP to rethink its death penalty stance a little bit. They created a death penalty review committee and came up with a nifty little slogan, quote, kill less and kill with caution, close quote. That's some slogan. Today there are 24 violent and 22 nonviolent crimes still punishable by death in China. What a decrease. What did not decrease is the number of people being killed by the government. According to Amnesty International, about 8,000 are killed each year, and that has been the case since 2007. That amounts to about 90% of the world's total, death penalty cases, according to China Against the Death Penalty. Those are all just estimates, of course, because the CCP keeps the number of people it executes as a highly classified state secret. Many of those who are sentenced to die learn their fate at large, public, open-air events. Quote, each June, local governments often hold mass sentencing rallies in which students, teachers, and the public are invited to witness the court handing down death penalties to individuals convicted of drug-related crimes. That's according to Kai Ong of Amnesty China, speaking to The Sun. After the sentencing, many of the condemned are executed immediately, some in mobile killing vans that drive around the country intending to make the killing more efficient. The convict is strapped to a table and then administered a lethal injection. Other than lethal injection, the CCP still uses firing squads. The police even practice executing prisoners with a pistol shot to the head, sometimes in public. What happens to the body after execution is still another abuse, but that would require its own segment, and we'll talk about that in the future. Now, I myself have spent some time in China. I wanted to learn about the language and culture of the country where the CCP exists, precisely because the CCP is the greatest enemy of human freedom in the world. So I studied Mandarin for a semester at Beijing University back in my college days, and then I spent a summer as a legal intern in Taiwan. The difference between the peace-loving and thriving Republic of Taiwan and the terrible dictatorship of the CCP on the mainland is stark and revealing. On the mainland, poverty is rampant, and the vast majority of the population still lives in terrible third-world conditions, while the privileged minority and friends of the CCP live prosperous lives in the cities. The Chinese economy is failing, and there are signs of it everywhere. Communist industrialization policies implemented on Soviet-style 5-year plans have misallocated economic resources and destroyed the country's environment. Pollution is out of control, and human suffering abounds. Taiwan, by contrast, has a large and prosperous middle class, a functioning democratic government, which, by the way, only uses paper ballots for elections, and a strong, vibrant, modern economy. Anyone who still labors under the misapprehension that socialism can bring prosperity and happiness need only visit Taiwan and then the Chinese mainland to be disabused of that ridiculous notion. So while studying in China 20 years ago, I would regularly see military vehicles pull up to one or another storefront or home. Military police would enter the home or store, pull a Chinese citizen out, throw them in the vehicle, and drive off as their families or other people stood there on the roadside, bewildered, unable to act. There are no freedoms or rights in China. So it is abundantly clear that neither human freedom nor human life have any value in the eyes of the CCP regime. Whether it be mistreatment, torture, or killing, the CCP rules with an iron fist, spreading fear throughout the land. Mao was very clear when he said political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Those were not just words, they were an overarching philosophy, one which the CCP has taken to heart and still believes in. But one cannot exist within that realm of philosophy without cost. The cost is great. A part of one's soul, some of his or her humanity, must be sacrificed, must be removed to enable functionality while causing such great suffering and death. What remains then of the soul no longer sees humanity for what it is. Rather, the remnant discerns only a reflection of itself, broken and seething with anger and hatred over loss. As such, a vicious cycle begins, its intensity gaining until true horror envelops absolutely everything. The CCP has long ago fallen to this sickness, and no matter what veil they hide it behind, it will remain there until the Chinese people can no longer stand the suffering. Our leaders must see the CCP in this light, call it out for exactly what it truly is. We must isolate the CCP and oppose them at every turn. Their grip on power is frail, and it may not take much to topple the terrible regime. That would be a very good thing for China, for the United States, and for the entire world. Failure to see the CCP for what it is, failure to isolate the CCP and inflict consequences for their terrible actions will spread the suffering. And this is not something from which our two oceans can protect us. The CCP is the most evil force in the world. It is a force that is desperately clinging to power. And it is a force that wants to destroy freedom completely. Its tentacles reach into our own country, a topic we'll be addressing in a future show. But for the sake of American security, for the sake of the Chinese people, for the sake of the American people, and for the sake of the entire world, we must all put all possible effort toward undermining and destroying the Communist Party of China. That's the show for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. That really helps out the channel. It will help us grow our reach. And be sure to tune in next time for Founding Principles with Doug Wardlow.